May 2nd, 1972. 3 SR-71 spy planes streak high over the jungles of North Vietnam. The aircraft are on a top-secret mission. They are delivering a personal message from President Richard Nixon to Americans being tortured in the infamous Hanoi Hilton prison. At noon, one plane unleashes a sonic boom. Exactly 15 seconds later, there is another. To the American prisoners, the signal confirms that a daring rescue mission, codenamed Operation Thunderhead, is a go.
We have a lot of stuff really highly classified, but that was really highly classified.
Out in North Vietnamese waters, a submarine slips silently into position.
It's a big commitment involving a submarine and a whole lot of fleet assets.
But the rescue attempt is a small part of a clandestine network that for 7 years has linked U.S. intelligence to the men locked inside the horrific dungeons of Hanoi.
This activity is recognized as one of the most significant activities in agency history.
A feat of remarkable spycraft, classified top secret for more than 40 years, and revealed here for the first time. February 1973. America's long nightmare in Vietnam is finally brought to a close. "591 American prisoners of war held by the North Vietnamese are coming home. They are the lucky ones. The war cost over 58,000 American lives and hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese.
We are profoundly grateful to our Commander-in-Chief and to our nation for this day. God bless America. God bless America.
The returning prisoners of war are told one crucial part of their story is top secret, only to be discussed in a series of classified debriefs that last days, even weeks.
This tape is classified secret, no foreign dissemination authorized, and distribution is limited to a need-to-know basis.
And then it's behind our back, and then they would take a rope and tie it around your elbows.
These sessions, heard here for the first time, document how POWs inside Vietnamese prisons secretly communicated with military intelligence and with the CIA. One debrief in particular sheds light on this classified program. It involves a Navy commander who survived 2,621 days in captivity to become a Vice Admiral, Medal of Honor recipient, and candidate for the Vice Presidency of the United States.
This is the debriefing of Captain James Bond Stockdale, U.S. Navy, on 19 February 1973.
Jim Stockdale's journey from aviator to spy begins on September 9, 1965. A bombing mission into North Vietnam from the carrier USS Oriskany out on the Gulf of Tonkin. To defend South Vietnam, America expands the war into the north, embarking on the most intensive bombing campaign in the history of warfare. The illusion of American invincibility is soon shattered. A Soviet surface-to-air missile brings down Stockdale's A-4 Skyhawk jet. Four days later, he arrives at the infamous Hỏa Lò Prison, located in the heart of the North Vietnamese capital, Hanoi. The pilots came to nickname it the Hanoi Hilton. Stockdale decides to risk his life to attempt to communicate with U.S. intelligence. The decision is based on his burning desire to expose the cruelty he and his fellow officers experienced inside that prison.
During most of September, I was taken for nearly a month of torture to extract statements. And they carried me into a room to the left. This is room 24.
Room 24. the cell that became synonymous with prolonged torture. After his return, Stockdale describes his experiences to his eldest son, Jim.
The primary form of torture, it had to do with cutting off blood circulation to the upper arms and various parts of the body, and then later, sequentially, to release it. The rush of the blood back into the muscle structure was cause for great pain. It wasn't one and done. It was never finished. They could continue this process for hours, days, sometimes weeks. At one point, Dad said, it got beyond your physical understanding of pain.
In the fall of 1965, Stockdale discovers he hasn't been singled out for abuse. Torture is the norm, inflicted by sadistic guards to extract confessions of alleged war crimes, to force prisoners to violate their oath of loyalty to the United States. Among more than 50 POWs is Navy Commander Jeremiah Denton. Shot down in July 1965, he will become a key player in the espionage operation. Like many others, he is tortured to get him to sign a statement saying the U.S. air war is immoral.
It began with 3 days on top of 2 stools placed one atop the other, and my hands cuffed tightly behind me. No food, no water.
Denton blacks out, loses his balance, and crashes to the concrete floor. But he refuses to sign anything to advance the North Vietnamese propaganda war, refuses to let them win.
Having convinced them that I would not give up by that means, they were going to torture me the following day.
That night, Denton sends a message to Stockdale. He doesn't expect to live through another day.
I gave Jim some instructions, such as what to tell my wife if he ever got home, and I believed that I'd be forgiven a lot of my sins and maybe go straight to heaven.
But Denton survives to continue living in hell. Stockdale concludes the world has to know what is happening inside this prison.
I figured that if there's some way we could let the American people know that we were under pressure, that the press reports that would naturally follow would affect captains dramatically. This was the key to our success.
But how is he going to let the American people know? At survival school, he was taught the art of writing in doublespeak, to conceal vital intelligence in seemingly innocuous text.
This was a time before our magic of modern-day electronics and this kind of communication. So the standard means of exchanging information with spies at the time was through a technique called secret writing.
But that relies on the prison authority allowing Stockdale to write. For 6 months, they refuse. Inside his isolation cell, he knows what to do, but is powerless to do it, a source of frustration for the CIA.
We didn't know at the time, until these communications began, for sure who was alive, who wasn't. Where were you? What were your conditions?
The CIA knows pilots have been trained to communicate, but so far there has been nothing but silence. Then the North Vietnamese make a colossal blunder. 52 pilots are paraded through the streets of Hanoi. Jeering crowds threaten to lynch the pilots as the world's press captures the mayhem. It's a public relations disaster for the North, who relent just a little in the face of international condemnation. Then, in December 1965, after months in isolation, living under a permanent threat of torture, Jim Stockdale is finally allowed to write his first letter home.
My dearest Sib, on this chilly afternoon, I am so glad to be permitted to write my letter and to let you know that I am still okay. One thinks of Vietnam as a tropical country, but in January the rains came and there was cold and darkness even at noon.
Darkness at Noon, a doublespeak reference to a well-known novel by Arthur Koestler, that vividly depicts atrocities inside Soviet labor camps. The letter takes 4 months to reach Coronado, California. His wife, Sybil, immediately assumes Jim must be referring to conditions inside the Hanoi Hilton. She contacts the Office of Naval Intelligence in Washington. Along with the CIA, they are already trying to find a way of communicating with American pilots held in North Vietnam.
There were several areas that were important when the secret writing channel was being considered and then was established. First was the morale of the prisoners. The POWs themselves, did anybody care about us? Well, this confirmed that people really cared about it. The second reason had to do with intelligence, with information that we needed from the firsthand experience of the POWs.
Sybil flies to Washington to meet Commander Robert Burrows from Naval Intelligence. The message to her is simple. Is she willing to allow her husband to be recruited as a spy?
Mom took great pause and asked Commander Burrows if any reassurances could be given about Dad's safety as if he was apprehended, exchanging these messages, in essence participating in espionage. And Bob told her he could give no reassurances.
That puts Sybil in a near impossible position.
Am I willing to participate in this? Do I have the confidence in the United States government, in the Central Intelligence Agency, to be able to work this in a way that my husband will not be further tortured, maybe even killed? Spies get executed.
Spies sent into the field by the CIA have also been taught advanced encryption to enable them to write coded letters. Stockdale has not. Even if Sybil agrees to participate, reaching him inside this prison is going to be a huge challenge. Then, just 2 weeks after Sybil's return from Washington, she sees Jeremiah Denton, Jim's Naval Academy classmate, hauled out to confess his sins. He appears confused and disoriented. But after the broadcast, Naval Intelligence calls Sybil with an explanation. Denton is actually blinking a Morse code message. T-O-R-T-U-R-E. Torture. The appearance convinces Sybil that U.S. intelligence should attempt to recruit Jim as a spy. Now it's up to both the CIA and Naval Intelligence to make that happen. In December 1966, 15 months after being shot down, Jim Stockdale receives his first letter from home.
We have a letter from your wife and a picture of your mother.
They had opened the mail already and said, "We have for you a letter from your wife and a picture of your mother." And in front of everyone in the room, Dad looked at the picture and blurted out,
"This isn't my mother."
But the confused state prevented anyone from understanding what he was saying, and he was sent back to his cell.
But who is the woman in the photo?
Grandmother Stockdale would never, as the letter suggested, never impulsively fly from her home in Illinois to Coronado, California. And frankly, she was very afraid of seawater and would never wade in the Pacific Ocean.
But for 3 days, he is unable to solve the riddle. What does it mean?
The letter was drafted and designed to try to tell Dad to soak the picture. The operant line was, "I am very lovely when wet." He finally remembered that urine was a good reagent, and he decided to soak the picture in his toilet bucket. After having done so, and again not seeing a message, he tossed it on the concrete and noticed that one of the corners was starting to separate and the picture was starting to come apart. Of course, this was the intention because as he separated the photograph, he was able to read messages and understand what the real intended message was. The message described how the letter that accompanied the photograph was written on special paper.
In his classified intelligence debrief, recorded the week after his return, Jim Stockdale recalls his first message from the CIA.
The note told me the letter was actually written on invisible carbon paper. All future letters bearing an odd date would be on invisible carbon paper.
It gave me instructions to write my invisible messages perpendicular to the lines on my letters home. It said to begin coded letters with "darling" and end with "your adoring husband." It warned me to be careful, that if caught, it could lead to espionage charges. And it said to soak any picture with a rose on it, and ended with "hang on."
With the arrival of the carbon paper, he felt like he could, in fact, influence policy and get messages back to the United States in some form. And he realized that he had transitioned from an aviator in a foreign country to a spy.
For the first time since he was shot down, Stockdale's life has purpose. The note from U.S. intelligence wants the names of American pilots held inside Hỏa Lò. Not an easy request. He remains in isolation, and the North Vietnamese don't take roll call. But the prisoners are communicating from cell to cell via tap code. The method, passed from one POW to the next, is designed to allow communication between prisoners held in solitary confinement. The POWs break the alphabet into a grid, 5 across, 5 down. By tapping the row and then the column, the POWs transmit complete sentences. They are fighting back, even if it's just within their cell block.
We could get a question and answer through 69 walls in 24 hours, very sophisticated. It sounds like about 30 secretaries typing away on typewriters. I tapped with guys through the wall that I never saw for 3 years. I knew everything about him, but I never saw his face.
Every night, Red McDaniel taps a G, followed by B, and then a U. God bless you. The tap code facilitates Stockdale's new role as an intelligence officer, pulling his troops together. To compile a complete list, Stockdale also needs a method to link the various cell blocks beyond the reach of tap code. J.J. Cannell is a Navy pilot shot down in July 1966, and for over 2 years, the Vietnamese are convinced he's completely crazy.
He's not that good.
He isn't.
We'll change one is better. I'm telling you.
He pretended to be crazy, and because of that, the enemy had isolated him in a place called the carriage house, which was next to the coal bin where the coal was. But isolated from the rest of the camp, except daily the other prisoners would go up to the coal bin to have cooking material, and while they did that, they would communicate with JJ.
JJ becomes the communications link between the cell blocks. Stockdale slowly pulls together a list that reaches far beyond anything known in Washington. Names of pilots whose family have already been told their loved one is dead. J.J. Cannell is forced to endure repeated electric shock treatments to restore sanity he never lost. He eventually dies in captivity. The guards suspect Stockdale is responsible for the internal communication and take him out for a special session with the man the POWs simply call Rabbit.
He was given to spontaneous slugging. I remember him particularly for the fact that he was the man that fed me my evening meal, applied the handcuffs daily, and I could depend on him to squeeze them down to where there was bone pressure, and I knew that by morning my wrists would be throbbing. At that time I was living solo and blindfolded and cuffed, except for meals.
Stockdale describes the harsh treatment in his next coded letter home. The CIA's Photo Analysis Center extracts the invisible carbon message and passes it along to Commander Robert Burrows at Naval Intelligence, who in turn gives the decoded material to Sybil.
And Mom read the secret message that said hand and leg irons 14 to 16 hours a day, masters at torture. A first real encounter with what Dad was experiencing, and tough for Mom to take and tough for Mom to share.
It is now 1967, and the air war over North Vietnam is expanding, and so is the number of captured Americans brought to Hanoi to be interrogated. In October, the son of a 4-star admiral arrives at Hỏa Lò. Navy Lieutenant Commander John McCain is a prized catch to be exploited. The pilots are told they can expect no favors from those they choose to bomb.
When we got to Hanoi, they told us we were criminals, we would be tried, and we would be executed or whatever. And, already I knew that anything like that was possible.
The guards have an idea. Put Danny Glenn in Jim Stockdale's cell, then torture the junior officer to find out what the wing commander is doing inside the confines of his cell.
The interrogator says, we will now allow you to live with another. He is older than you. You must not take orders from him, but you're allowed to live together.
Rather than spying on Stockdale, Danny Glenn helps his cellmate pull together the next coded message. It's the first message from Hỏa Lò that allows the POWs to fight back. Stockdale orders specific North Vietnamese targets to be hit by U.S. aircraft.
The solar plexus of Hanoi's war machine was their propaganda radio station. It must be destroyed. Also, the main railway line headed south was about 1.5 miles from the prison. The trains rolled south after dark. It needed to be hit. As I placed the invisible carbon paper over my letter to Sib, I remember thinking, God, if I'm caught, I'm dead.
On August 7th, 1967, within days of the CIA extracting the message, President Lyndon Baines Johnson lifts his moratorium on bombing near Hanoi. The target, the rail lines heading south. Stockdale hears the bombs fall and tells Danny Glenn he feels invigorated. This Navy flyer is back in the game. But he isn't the only one upbeat about the course of the war. November 1967, LBJ travels to South Vietnam to assure the American forces that there is a light at the end of the tunnel.
The enemy cannot win now in Vietnam. He can harass, he can terrorize, he can inflict casualties while taking far greater losses himself. But he just cannot win.
Tell me your name.
Under ferocious interrogation, the guards extract more confessions from supposedly repentant American pilots.
I am guilty of crimes against the people of cities, towns, and villages.
Recordings broadcast around the world are piped into the cell blocks housing the POWs. Stockdale is horrified by what he hears and is determined to order the POWs to stay off the air, even if they have to endure torture. He has to get that message to Washington, but he is down to his last page of invisible carbon paper. And guards are heading down the block to conduct a thorough search of his cell. Rather than be caught as a spy, he eats it, leaving him powerless to continue his espionage work for naval intelligence and the CIA. But in December 1967, he makes a crucial discovery that will transform the espionage effort.
Dad discovered that one of his prison mates had been trained in a clandestine cryptography. He was unable to communicate directly with this individual, but he was able to work with the individual, and eventually the person who had been trained extended his foot almost outside of his door, so Dad was able to see his big toe. With his big toe, using Morse code and some other modified methods, over a period of 4 or 5 days, the prisoner who had been trained taught Dad this cryptographic code.
The code is committed to memory. Nothing is ever written down. From now on, every letter he sends Sybil contains sophisticated CIA code. Once those encrypted letters arrive at Langley, the agency now wants to expand the program. They dispatch officers to California to train Sybil in a form of simplified encryption.
My earnest hope is that you hastily return.
The code and the modifications to the code were remarkable. It was a very sophisticated form of clandestine communication that had been developed and, in fact, had been used in prior wars by other groups of prisoners.
Sybil is now a spy in her own right. Encrypted letters flow in both directions. A couple joined in espionage, knowing the risks and accepting how it might all end.
He called it the best of times and the worst of times, and that they came together as a team. So it was a love of each other, from my perspective, that allowed them to generate such a phenomenal outcome.
Having established a communications link with Washington, taps on the walls turn increasingly to the possibility of escape. In early 1969, John Dramisi and Ed Atterbury climb over the wall of a prison to the west of Hỏa Lò. Recaptured 12 hours later, they are both severely punished. Atterbury is tortured to death. Guards go in search of collaborators, eventually focusing on Lieutenant Commander Red McDaniel.
They stripped me down, spread eagle on the floor, and started out with a fan belt. Have a guy on one side, a guy on the other side, and they'd start in the back and work down through the legs.
During the brutal session, McDaniel's elbow is shattered.
The bone was protruding through the skin. It didn't stop them. They would try to push it back in, just physically. But they continued the torture for another, went a total of 14 days, and the arm was broken about the third or fourth day, I believe. And I had nothing else left to give, and I made a total surrender.
Surrender to his God, a source of strength when all else seems lost.
But I learned a lesson. I learned that courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is simply the presence of faith.
Faith that has to sustain Red for a further 3 long years. In January 1969, Jim Stockdale is about to go through the worst of times. The guards still want a confession and intend to break him unless they get one.
I was taken over to the Navi room for nearly a month of torture.
North Vietnamese guards inflict what is by now a familiar torture. They pull Stockdale's arms back over his shoulders for hours at a time. He becomes delirious, will say anything to stop the pain, even if it means disloyalty. But the guards want more. They want to take him downtown to commit treason before television cameras. They need him to look presentable and tell him to take a shower to wash away the stain of sustained torture.
He takes the soap and soaps his face a little bit, but then proceeds to soap up. And having done so, he takes the crude razor and begins to cut his scalp. It was not so much the absence of hair as it was the blood coming down into his eyes and on his face. This technique of self-disfigurement in order to prevent his being exposed to cameras or foreign dignitaries or journalists.
Stockdale then grabs a wooden stool and batters his own face to ensure he is unsuitable for the cameras.
And the guards rushed in and screamed at Dad, "What will I tell the commander?" Dad said, "You tell him that the captain will not be going downtown."
An encounter that led James Bond Stockdale to be awarded the Medal of Honor. But in 1969, it is just a transitory battle won in a very protracted war. January 20, 1969.
I, Richard Billhouse Nixon, do solemnly swear that you will
Nixon arrives promising to end America's long nightmare in Vietnam. The country is tired of the false hopes and broken dreams. They just want out, and they want their prisoners home. A Herculean task for the incoming administration.
Very second day, the casualty report for the last week was reported, and it was 502 Americans. I'll never forget that number. 502 Americans died our first week on the job, and it was our war.
and they are now responsible for American prisoners of war.
I asked the secretary if I could have his authority to go and learn everything I could within government about what we knew about our prisoners of war and missing men, because I had a sense that things were in very bad shape.
Dick Capon is shown NSA intercepts and CIA reports, but it's Stockdale's letters home to Sybil, smuggled out of the Hanoi Hilton, that put a human face to collective suffering. It's enough to convince Secretary of Defense Melvin Laird to directly confront the North Vietnamese with evidence of prisoner abuse.
The North Vietnamese have claimed that they are treating our men humanely. I am distressed by the fact that there is clear evidence that this is not the case. Thank you.
At the press conference, Capon and Secretary Laird finally exposed the propaganda used by the North Vietnamese.
There is clear evidence, as the Secretary stated, that the enemy is treating U.S. prisoners it holds inhumanely. One recent film, a propaganda film, included an elaborate spread of food, which only 2 prisoners are shown carrying, but neither is shown actually eating what we think are suspiciously large portions.
But it isn't just a change of tone. The Pentagon notifies Stockdale through coded letters that it's open to the idea of launching a rescue mission inside North Vietnam, but they need help.
If you are planning such kind of operations, again, we needed to know information of where you were, how many there were, lots of factors before you could mount any kind of reasonable rescue attempt.
By December 1969, that seems a real possibility. 61 prisoners are moved to Son Tay, and some of them know the encryption code. It is a remote camp 23 miles to the west of Hanoi, and the POWs suspect the isolation of the camp makes it vulnerable.
We arrived at Son Tay in several groups. All of the people who were there had been in the system before, so we knew how to communicate. There was a discussion early about where we were. There's a mountain. We knew the height of that mountain. We could determine the direction of that mountain, and from triangulation, we could give a rough estimate of how far we were from that mountain and what direction it was. And we wanted that word to get out.
Nixon orders a rescue mission so secret that the special forces who trained for 9 months don't know their intended target. Don't know, that is, until they enter North Vietnamese airspace. On the night of November 21st, 1970, for the first time in the war, America is going after its POWs to bring them home. The mission to free American POWs approaches the prison at Son Tay. 61 prisoners are believed to be inside the camp. One inmate is Danny Glenn, who hears the helicopters coming.
We were awakened by bombs going off, SAMs being fired, AAA fire. We don't know what it's about, but we're all sitting there cheering, shaking our fists, jumping up and down, and going crazy.
The only problem is that Danny Glenn isn't at Son Tay. 4 months earlier, POWs had sent a coded message saying they had moved, but because of a backlog of letters, this isn't decoded by the U.S. intelligence until the day of the raid. That night, the POWs are 15 miles from freedom. Critics in Washington immediately deride it as a spectacular failure. That is not how the prisoners saw it.
Sending the message that we had not given up. I can't imagine that not being one of incredible rejuvenation for anybody in those circumstances.
The Son Tay raid sends a very clear message to the North Vietnamese. Their remote prison camps are vulnerable. All POWs are brought back to Hanoi and moved into what becomes known as Camp Unity, a sealed compound inside the walls of Hỏa Lò.
When we moved back into Hanoi, they'd moved us into a large room, and there were 59 people in the room, which we thought was fantastic. Over the next few days, we had communications with everyone who had been shot down up to that point, something over 350 prisoners.
Finally out of isolation, Jim Stockdale dramatically expands the covert writing program. The principle is clear. The more correspondence sent out, the better the chance the message will get through.
Well, I was not trained in covert communications, but some of my cellmates were, and from them, they taught us. We did that as a lifeline, and so we knew, the U.S. knew what was happening in that camp.
Stockdale calls the covert network the Hanoi Saloon. His code name is the Bartender. His principal deputy is the master communicator, codenamed Martini. He mixes up the message before sending sections to his team of writers.
80% of the prison population were part of the network I led. We assigned parts of messages to the writers inside the cell blocks. No one, other than the master communicator and myself, had the complete message.
Every message is memorized, translated into encryption code, and then written down.
In the end, they developed messages that would go out in waves, and 5 of the writers would write a version of the first part of the message. Another 5 writers would write their version of a second part of the message. So you would wind up sending home a series of sequenced letters that contained different messages that came and could be used as a whole.
So a program that started with a single Polaroid picture is about to move into high gear. In the spring of 1971, the CIA's Office of Technical Service offers to smuggle into Hanoi spy paraphernalia that will enhance Stockdale's capabilities. Robert Wallace, the division's former director, knows the man who led the effort, who is known by the cover name of Brian Lipman.
Brian Lipman was a CIA officer serving undercover. He was an officer who had both the capability and the discipline to do the kind of work that is work after hours when nobody else was around, so as to keep the communications operation with the POWs as secret as possible.
As humanitarian packages start to get through, it presents Brian Lipman and the CIA an almost endless set of possibilities. The agency smuggles 4 miniature radios into the camp, all hidden in tubes of toothpaste. The radios are small enough to fit into a prisoner's ear, and the most prized contraband of all is an encoded microdot.
Think about the microdot in terms of the size of a period on a piece of paper. That period could contain as much as a full sheet of information, 200, 300 words.
They are hidden inside packets of Kool-Aid, all visible through a tiny Stanhope lens.
This is an example of the Stanhope lens. The microdot then could be placed on one end of the lens. A microdot could be read.
Minute encrypted messages arrive. Some show a series of coded numbers to be deciphered by those taught CIA encryption. These lenses are a vital part of the clandestine network.
I was in charge of the microdot program. That program was our most closely guarded secret. No one ever gave it up. As far as I know, there was no compromise of the microdot program. The Vietnamese never knew.
From the agency perspective, this activity is recognized as one of the most significant activities in agency history.
By 1971, contraband is coming in and messages are going out. Inevitably, the prisoners begin to wonder if another escape attempt is possible. But many remember what happened in 1969, when Vietnamese reprisal for a previous escape led to mass torture. Captain Gordon Peterson evaluated what happened next for a Navy Performance Review Board.
The concern that another escape attempt would wreak havoc with the POWs left behind was a very serious concern that could not be discounted by those American POWs in positions of command responsibility.
John Dramisi did escape in 1969, but was recaptured 12 hours later. A North Vietnamese purge followed that impacted his whole cell block. Now he puts forward another escape plan. This time, Dramisi is told to obtain an unmistakable signal that clearly demonstrates that the President of the United States supports the plan. An encrypted message is sent outlining how prisoners intend to escape Hỏa Lò. make it to the Red River, and then swim or commandeer a boat to sail 92 miles east to the open waters of the Gulf of Tonkin. There, the POWs want Navy SEALs to pick them up and carry them to safety. The encrypted message is delivered to the desk of Admiral Thomas Moorer, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Mike Mullen knows what he would have done next.
As the chairman myself, I want to talk to the leadership that's going to essentially execute this mission. I want to understand what the risks are, what the probabilities are. And the first individual I would go see would be the Secretary of Defense and lay out everything I knew about it. And then we would either agree or disagree that we need to take this to the President of the United States.
And that is what happens. Richard Nixon is preparing for his re-election campaign in 1972. He immediately understands the huge boost he'd receive if he introduces a liberated American prisoner to a joint session of Congress. The president orders a submarine to enter North Vietnamese waters and stand ready to liberate POWs sailing down the Red River. It's the most daring Navy SEAL mission of the war and remains secret for 35 years. May 1972, the USS Grayback sets sail from Subic Bay in the Philippines. The boat is under the control of Navy Captain John Chamberlain. Its mission, to rescue American prisoners escaping from a North Vietnamese prison, is directed by the CIA. On board, SEAL Team 1's Alpha Platoon under the leadership of Lieutenant Spence Dry. The mission calls for many subs to transport the SEALs to an island a mile off the North Vietnamese coast to intercept escaping American prisoners of war. Inside the Hanoi Hilton, the prisoners have no idea the rescue mission has been approved. Their coded message to Washington asked for an unmistakable signal from the heavens to show that President Nixon supports the escape plan. On May 2nd, it's delivered by 3 SR-71s flying close to the sound barrier as they approach Hanoi.
The signal that was sent was an expression that the National Command Authority of the United States of America would stand by its POWs and attempt to rescue them. That was a powerful message.
That emphatic signal presents a huge problem for the senior American officers inside the prison. They never imagined the mission would be approved, never thought they'd have to decide whether Dramisi should be allowed to escape. Some thought he should try. Some have a very different judgment, born of experience.
I have respect for John Dramisi, a real firebrand, tough guy. But from my vantage point, it was almost impossible to escape from that system and make it to the coast.
Dramisi insists he has to at least try. Meanwhile, the USS Grayback sails on. June 3rd, 1972, it reaches its position off the coast of North Vietnam. On board is Navy SEAL Moki Martin.
We launched the SDV, and for about 2.5 or 3 hours, the SDV is moving and moving and moving.
The currents and tides are a huge challenge.
Everybody is on phones. You could hear what everybody is saying. And I think the pilot started to say, I'm losing power. We're running battery power down.
The SEALs must abort and are picked up by helicopter and transported to the cruiser USS Long Beach.
When we were on the USS Long Beach, it was really important that we get back to the Grayback and tell them about the currents.
John Wilson is part of the helicopter crew that volunteers for the top secret mission, and that night he heads out to return the SEALs to the Grayback.
And they indicated that they were going to do an open ocean drop, and that they needed to be able to get down to 20 feet, 20 knots maximum.
But in the sheer blackness of the night, the chopper struggles to get into position. Whatever the risks, team leader Spence Dry is determined to complete the mission.
I'm with you, swim buddy. You go and I'll follow you out the door.
And we made the approach, and the word came over the intercom, put the swimmers out, drop, drop, drop.
You know, there's always these feelings that some of the guys, or some of the guys in platoon said they'll follow him into hell. I think I did.
All 4 men jumped out the door, and it was pitch black. You couldn't see anything.
The minute I cleared the door, I did my mental count in my head, and I counted 1,000, 2,000, 3,000. I goes, damn it.
The helicopter is much too high.
And I hit the water.
The 4 SEALs slam into the water like it's concrete. 2 SEALs suffer minor injuries, but a third, the team leader Spence Dry, breaks his back and dies on impact.
I flipped him over, and in the moonlight I could see he had blood coming out of his nose, and I was shocked. All we're trying to do is do this operation, and we just ran into things that was really out of our control.
Yet despite the setback, Operation Thunderhead continues to monitor North Vietnamese waters for a further 3 days, waiting for prisoners who never appear. What the SEALs don't know is that inside the Hanoi Hilton, the POW leadership has finally made a crucial decision. They fear that if they allow an escape attempt, a brutal purge of remaining prisoners is sure to follow.
In light of that, we all hope it didn't go, and the leadership said no.
A decision that remains controversial even today, but endorsed by a commander who faced similar tough choices.
Or the leaders on the ground, the individuals in the situation, they have to, as best they can, use their judgment, and I would never question that.
But thankfully, the Vietnam War is finally drawing to a close. In December 1972, Nixon orders one final aerial onslaught to force the North to accept his peace terms.
Stand by to release. Ready now. Bombs rain.
As bombs rain down on Hanoi, the communists claim American POWs inside Hỏa Lò have been killed, but the prisoners have the final word. By now, a miniature transmitter has been smuggled into the camp. A Morse code message is sent out that reads, "Vietnamese lie, we're okay." It reaches the White House within hours. Reinvigorated, Nixon orders the bombing to continue. Finally, in January 1973, the North accepts Nixon's conditions. It brings to an end U.S. involvement in a bitterly divisive war. The prisoners return home, grateful for clandestine assistance they are told they can never discuss.
Knowing that we were able to contact the U.S. government and we could get our story out, and that someday they were going to come to get us, and that kept us going from day to day. That little hope, believing that tomorrow's going to be better than today.
Jim Stockdale is on the first flight home.
Jim? Yes? Oh, I love you, Jim. Are you all right?
Yes, I am. I'm in very, very good health. I love you so, and I'm so proud of you all, and I've heard so many things about what you've been doing and how active you've been.
Active in a program that remained classified for decades. Only today can the risks taken by the prisoners be fully understood without jeopardizing current operations.
Secrets have a half-life, sort of like radioactivity. And some secrets have a half-life of a minute. Some secrets have a half-life of 100 years. I think the half-life of the information we've talked about today, that's been neutralized. It's no longer radioactive.
An operation led by Stockdale and witnessed by those who went through hell and returned to tell their stories.
I first became aware of the respect in which other men held him. At Balboa Naval Hospital, I would occasionally walk with some of his colleagues. When I was introduced to them, they were very thoughtful, and they would look, step back, look me up and down, and sometimes say things like, "Your father is the greatest leader of men I've ever known." That alone would give me some sense of the depth of the loyalty of the men he had led through what they would later call less than ideal conditions.
Vice Admiral James Bond Stockdale died on July 5, 2005. Admiral Mike Mullen returned to his beloved Annapolis to deliver the eulogy.
We too often just throw this word of hero around. He's so much more than that. In the end, He was able to essentially put in place a structure that allowed so many of his fellow prisoners to survive, to inspire them, and to bring them home.
Vice Admiral Stockdale led a small army of resistors deep behind enemy lines. For years, invisible carbon paper and advanced encryption code allowed them to reach beyond the walls of Hỏa Lò. Microdots brought news from home, a glimpse of heaven to ease the pain of hell. Success measured not in the numbers who escaped, but in the numbers encouraged to hold on through another day. Through the darkest of times, they were willing to die to preserve secrets that can finally be told.